The ice screamed as two white titans collided, and now only one lay gasping on the blue floe as wind carved knives of spindrift. Dr. Surya Khan said, "If he doesn't stand soon, this cold will finish what teeth began." Kalakaputi said, "He has stood through worse but not alone." His eyes tracked fresh cracks like maps of old stories across the floe. Leo Anders filmed with chattering teeth and whispered that the rival had vanished toward the pressure ridge. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear with a torn left ear and an old collar scar, coughed steam like an engine losing fire. Surya saw the brass tag ghost on his shoulder and said, "I collared him once, and I promised he would be more than data." Kalak planted his boots wide and said, "Knowing a bear is like knowing weather. Today, it chooses us." Leo said, "Do we help, or do we watch him freeze into a legend?" And the radio crackled with policy colder than the wind. The floe popped under Ujarak's ribs, and the sound traveled like a warning tapped from the sea below. Surya lowered her voice and said, "Breathe, old man, follow our voices to the hard blue," and his amber eyes opened like coals, refusing night. The wind slackened enough for Surya to hear her own guilt, and she knelt behind the ridge with frost hissing over the crest. Dr. Surya Khan said, "I collared him in his strength, and I thought that meant I knew him." Kalakaputi said, knowing a bear's prediction only until the ice speaks, and he scanned the floe with calm hands. Leo Anders said, "Can we intervene without breaking the rules?" and his voice trembled more than his camera. Ujarak tested his forelegs and failed, lifting a lip in a voiceless snarl that warmed the air and then died. The silence that followed felt like a verdict, and even the raven circling kept its wings tight. The ice popped under his chest and wrote a short hollow sentence that the sea could read. Surya said, "Observation is just watching someone drown in slow motion." And the radio responded with static. Kalak said, "If the floe breaks, he chooses a line, and we choose whether to walk it with him." Leo shifted closer for focus, and the bear turned an ear to their voices like a ship turning its prow. Gray light sifted through the squall and turned every breath to lace, and the stove tin rattled like a poor drum. Leo Anders said, "We can't carry a polar bear," and the words felt small on the open ice. Kalakaputi said, "No one carries a mountain. We coax it to roll," and he drew a path with his boot. Dr. Surya Khan radioed headquarters and explained that cold slowed his bleeding, but not his decline. Ujarak lifted his head and faced their scent like a swimmer seeking shore he has not seen. The call ended with a careful order to observe only, and it fell into the snow like a sealed envelope. Surya said, "I wrote that policy when the world felt simpler," and she watched his chest stutter, then steady. Leo tracked a tremor that ran from foreleg to shoulder, and the lens fogged with his breath. Kalak said, "He hears us, even the parts we whisper," and the wind folded into a brief hush. The horizon answered with a deep crack, and everyone learned again how the ocean speaks through ice. Surya said, "If he stands, we guide. If he falls, we wait for breath to return," and the rules felt like thin rope. Leo said, "The rival is still out there," and the ridge looked closer than before. The first raven arrived, a black stitch on a gray seam, and it watched with the patience of old hunger. Dr. Surya Khan said, "Scavengers measure time by courage and collapse," and she unrolled a sled pack with stiff fingers. Kalakaputi shoved a marked pole into crust and said, "If the floe breaks, we follow the thicker song." Leo Anders eased closer and filmed the tremor running along Ujarak's foreleg as he tried again to stand. A fine thread of blood smoked on the snow and then froze into freckles that mapped a private war. The wind brought salt from a new lead, and the scent made everyone think of the ocean listening. Surya hovered over the tranquilizer kit and said, "I have no permission, only debt," and closed the lid again. Kalak unwrapped a seal meat lure and then wrapped it back, and his restraint felt heavier than a shout. Leo said, "He is listening to us," and the bear's ear ticked to each syllable like a compass needle. The pressure ridge groaned like a door, and the sky lowered, and the day shortened without asking first. The storm's lip rose on the horizon, and shadow stripes crawled over the flow as if measuring what to take. Kalakaputi said, "He needs a corridor," and he stomped a line angling toward thicker blue ice. Dr. Surya Khan said, "We can make the dangerous choice obvious," and she waved Leo to post at the weak seam. Leo Anders said, "I'll mark the worst ground with myself," and he stood where the snow sounded hollow. Ujarak read their bodies, snorted once, and took a shaking step toward the path they had drawn. For a heartbeat, Surya saw the cub he once was, and the father he might have become across a kinder winter. A distant boom rolled over the flow, and the horizon trembled as pack ice slammed like stone doors. Surya said, "If he reaches that blue slab, he can rest and let cold seal the open places," and hope thinned her voice. Kalak said, "If the storm reaches us first, we take our lesson with frostbite," and he did not smile. Ujarak lifted his muzzle to the wind, gathered a scent that stiffened him, and stared toward the pressure ridge. Dawn bruised into gold along the flow, and the wind lowered its voice around the ridge. Dr. Surya Khan crouched behind a snow wall and said, "Tea first, judgment later." Kalak Aputi scratched a rough map into crust and said, "Thicker blue here, singing cracks there." Leo Anders steadied the camera and whispered, "His breath is slower, but it keeps a beat." Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear with a torn left ear, lifted into a sphinx. He faced their scent and let steam roll from his muzzle like an engine refusing the stall. The stove ticked and threw a warm ribbon that painted Surya's gloves amber. She said, "He broke our bait barrel once and refused to be only a statistic." Kalak said, "He taught us where the flow thins, not with words but with roots." The sea sighed under the ice, and the sound felt like comfort disguised as warning. Leo framed the collar scar on his shoulder and murmured, "The ring we left, never truly left." Surya said, "A promise can scar as deep as a wound when winter tests it." Snow sifted sideways in threads and stitched torn light over the scene. Ujarak blinked, licked frost from whiskers, and watched the smoke drift toward thicker blue. The sun lifted a thin coin above the clouds and turned breath into glass. Dr. Surya Khan said, "I named him Ujarak because he would not move for anyone." Her smile broke and reformed, as if it were frost underfoot. Kalakaputi pointed his mitten at a web of new cracks and said, "Ridge pressure is waking." Leo Anders said, "He is licking the blood crust like salt," and he rolled focus to the wound. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, nosed the snow and tasted the iron the storm had spared. A raven stitched a slow circle and measured the distance between courage and collapse. Surya hovered over the tranquilizer kit and said, "We have no permission, only debt." She slid a syringe back into foam and felt policy scrape like ice on gumline. Kalak said, "Some rescues start when waiting becomes a lie we tell ourselves." The radio muttered legal weather vanes and offered them the comfort of inaction. Ujarak shook his head, sneezed frost and pressed one paw into firmer blue. The day brightened without warming, and every sparkle hid a decision. Leo said, "If we move, we must not teach him to lean on us," and his hands steadied. The radio woke with clipped politeness and said, "Do not engage." Dr. Surya Khan stared at the speaker and said, "I wrote that sentence." Kalakaputi said, "Then write a better ending with your feet and voice." Leo Anders lowered his camera and listened to the weather inside the words. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, gathered his legs under him and rose like a docked ship. His haunches trembled, but the spine held true the way old bridges do. The wind paused as if it wanted to hear the next move. Surya said, "If he stands, we guide without touching, and we let him collect his strength." Kalak planted flags of bootprints along the thicker glare ice. Leo marked the weak seam with his own slight silhouette. The bear shifted weight and pressed a forepaw onto a line that sang like glass. A hairline fissure darkened and wrote a thin river under his pad. Surya said, "Easy now, old man," and her voice laid a plank across the crack. The flow answered with a hollow knock that traveled out to the ridge and back. Ujarak blinked snow from his lashes and read their spacing like a trail a bear could accept. Kalakaputi said, "He needs a corridor," and he stomped a slanted path toward harder blue. Dr. Surya Khan said, "We turn danger into a bright sign and trust his reading of us." She waved Leo Anders wide and posted him like a flag on the most treacherous seam. Their bodies formed arrows that pointed away from the singing lines. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, studied the shapes and snorted once like a judge. He set his paw down where bootprints thickened and let weight settle in stages. The horizon boomed as distant plates slammed shut like old doors. Snow lifted in sheets and then flattened, as if the wind were deciding between moods. Surya said, "3 more steps, and you can lie on the blue-backed slab." Leo framed the slab and muttered, "It looks like a table set for mercy." Kalak paced the path and listened for any note that sounded hollow. The bear's shadow thinned to a smear, and then lengthened as the sun pushed through gauze. Every motion slowed to keep balance with the whispers underfoot. Surya breathed with him, counting beats the way field medics count hope. The sun climbed a thin finger, and then vanished behind gauze like a shy witness. Dr. Surya Khan said, "If he reaches that slab, the cold will seal the bleeding." Kalakaputi said, "If the storm reaches us first, the lesson will cost skin." Leo Anders filmed the way Ujarak's gait dragged, and then found a steadier meter. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, paused and lifted his muzzle into the wind. He tasted the air the way sailors taste weather, before rigging tight. A new scent stiffened him, and he stared toward the pressure ridge with old anger. Leo said, "The rival is looping back," and the camera trembled, then held. Surya felt iron rise in her mouth, which was only fear learning to speak plainly. The ridge crackled, as if the coast were grinding its teeth at their delay. Kalak said, "Eyes up, keep him moving, and do not promise more than we can pay." The storm built a jaw along the horizon and showed teeth of blown ice. Ujarak took a shaking step, and every crystal under his pad chose a side. Surya said, "Blue slab, old man, 2 breaths more," and the wind carried the words like a rope. Snow arrived like whispered accusations that stuck to lashes and swallowed landmarks, and the light thinned to milk. Leo Anders said, "Visibility is dropping," and his voice made a small cave in the wind. Dr. Surya Khan said, "Hypovolemia before hypothermia. His engine is sputtering," and she watched Uraka's gait unravel. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, reached the blue-backed slab and folded with a fighter's slow surrender. Kalakaputi said, "Let him lie where the ice is honest," and he planted his boots wide to listen for hollow notes. The storm opened its jaw and swallowed the corridor marks they had stamped. Surya said, "If he sleeps, we approach only with eyes and patience," and she warmed the dart kit in her mitts without opening it. Leo lowered the camera to spare the animal his fear and filmed the breath cloud pulsing like a lamp. The sea answered with a deep syllable that ran under them and returned as a tremor in the knee. Ujarak licked rime from his whiskers and turned an ear to their voices as if sound could be a rope. Surya said, "You are not a number, old man," and the sentence fogged and drifted toward thicker blue. The wind dragged sheets of snow like curtains and then forgot to close them, and for a heartbeat they could see the way out. The squall thickened into curtains and pressed sound flat until each breath felt counted by a clerk with cold fingers. Dr. Surya Khan said, "We can't sedate if we can't read the drift," and she weighed needle flight like a pilot. Kalakaputi said, "We can't wait if a hungry ear hears him breathe," and his gaze combed the gauze. Leo Anders said, "Then we wager movement against mercy," and the camera hung quiet at his hip. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, lay with his head high and his eyes half-lidded like embers refusing ash. A low growl arrived from behind the veil and crawled into their boots with the certainty of old law. Surya said, "That is not the wind," and her hand found the dart kit the way a memory finds a scar. Kalak spread his stance and stamped once to test the plate that hummed under snow. Leo raised a flare and did not fire, and restraint shook his wrist like a metronome. The bear shifted his weight and answered the unseen with a puff of steam that broke and braided in the gust. Soria said, "If we move now, we move as signs, not walls," and she looked to the thicker blue. The weather swallowed the horizon and left them a room only 6 heartbeats wide, and the door was moving. The rival arrived as a moving hill with black gums, older, leaner, reading the cracks like a thief reads doors. Dr. Surya Khan said, "We divert with light," and she raised a flare pistol that steadied in both hands. Kalakapudi said, "Hold left, I will thicken the right," and his boots carved a counterline toward truer ice. Leo Anders fired and the flare tore a seam through the white roof of weather and stitched a brief ceiling. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, rolled to his chest and stood into pain as if wearing a crown made of teeth. The rival did not startle. He angled toward the lace of thinnest ice and tested Flex with a paw that knew physics. Saria said, "He will crack the stage and make us choose water," and she widened her orange into a loud geometry. Kalak chanted a steady thread in Inuktitut, and his voice found the drum in the ice and beat time for courage. Leo slid to mark the worst seam with his body, and felt the flow answer under heel like glass under fire. The sky spilled snow that turned the flare's smoke into ropes, and then erased them with one long breath. Ujarak stepped to the firmer plate so his weight could write a new rule between the two males. The rival lowered his head and listened, and the listening was more dangerous than any charge. The ice boomed a belly-deep syllable and split a palm's width between the rival and Ujarak, and the flow flexed. Dr. Surya Khan said, "If he charges, he swims," and she spread her arms to enlarge her small orange horizon. Kalakaputi said, "If he swims, the sea chooses who learns the colder lesson," and he stamped a thicker arc. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, placed himself between the oncoming shape and the safe corridor, like a door of will. The rival slowed not from fear, but to listen to the ice speak, which was worse than rage. Soria said, "We are signposts, not walls," and she stepped left to pull the line of safety brighter. Kalak's chant softened into breath, and the wind braided it into a rope that tugged the moment steady. Leo Anders tasted metal, and held the camera low, so his body stayed louder than the lens. The crack answered their footwork with a widening question that wrote doubt in black water. Ujarak set his paws on the firmer plate, and shifted weight with the patience of a bridge settling. The rival tried the lace again, and paused, his head canted, as if considering an angle only old bears study. The snow thinned enough to reveal the corridor they had drawn, and choice finally had a shape. The fissure opened into a narrow lade that tried to write their names apart, and the wind lost interest and softened. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, stepped to the firmer plate and let weight settle like a judge signing. The rival tested his side, and read a failure he did not owe himself to fix, and hunger did its math. Dr. Surya Khan said, "If he charges, the page tears. If he pivots, we keep the book," and her breath burned. Kalakaputi said, "He smells an easier story downwind," and he tilted his chin toward the invisible coast. Leo Anders remembered the camp that leaves fish for mercy, and winced at how mercy wanders. The rival lifted his head and angled away, following a ribbon of scent that promised less cost. Ujarak lowered his muzzle and took one deliberate step that linked plate to plate without a complaint. Soria said, "Hold where you are, old man," and the words crossed the lead like a quiet bridge. The horizon boomed again, but this time the sound felt like a door closing on the worst room. Kalak's shoulders dropped, and his relief looked like respect more than victory, which mattered. Leo steadied the frame on the bear's eyes, which were not grateful, only present, and that was the truth they needed. The storm thinned, and left threads of snow that stitched beauty over violence. The rival had gone, and the flow learned how to breathe again. Dr. Surya Khan exhaled, and felt the debt return heavier than her pack. She said, "He didn't fear us, he feared wasting time." Kalakaputi said, "Kindness left fish down coast, and it will feed the wrong mouth." Leo Anders tightened focus, and watched Ujarak lick the torn shoulder slow. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, curled and cleaned with patient care. Frost melted on his tongue, then flashed to crystals on his whiskers. Soria saw the old collar scar, raised like a ring pressed into living hide. She remembered the tag that overheated last winter and burned this place. She said, "We marked him to find him, and we also mapped pain." Kalek said, "Debts are counted by breath. We can still pay." Leo said, "If we help without claiming him," and the ice listened. The radio hissed, a metal conscience that knew only policy. Dr. Soria Khan cradled the dart rifle without raising it. She said, "Microdose only, and only if wind holds." Kalekaputi nodded and unspooled a safety line to the sled. He said, "The ice accepts small courage and punishes great pride." Leo Anders filmed the green feathers of the dart and swallowed. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, stood shakily and watched. His amber eyes held a patience that neither begged nor blamed. Soria clicked the safety off and felt a promise break and reform. She said, "We clean, we don't claim, pain first, law later." The wind steadied as if it wanted this math to be simple. Kalek's chant braided calm until hands remembered steadiness. The sea underfoot thumped once, then went quiet like a judge listening. Dr. Soria Khan set her feet in the corridor, stamped into crust. She said, "Breathe with me," and counted the gusts between heartbeats. The dart leapt and stitched a tiny promise into his thigh. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, flinched like a king to a gnat. He licked the spot and rumbled low, more insulted than afraid. Kalekaputi anchored the sled rope and watched the plate for new song. He said, "Small medicine, big patience." Leo Anders framed the impact and pulled back, choosing dignity over proof. The wind signed her math and carried no drift to bend the needle. Soria lowered the rifle and let her hands shake after the work. She said, "Now we wait for edges to soften without dulling will." Snow fell like ash that wanted to bless rather than bury. Ujarak's breathing found a slower cadence that still kept sovereignty. Time rearranged into 6 heartbeats, and then into a deep quiet. Dr. Soria Khan said, "If he lies, we approach. If he stands, we honor distance." Kalekaputi answered, "If he dreams, let ancestors walk the perimeter." Leo Anders recorded the slow lowering of the great head, careful to stay wide. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, drowsed without surrendering posture. Snow sifted down and rewrote violence into a softer draft. A crescent scar on his muzzle caught light, the small bite of a long-gone cub. Soria whispered. He played once and felt the sentence open her defenses. Kalek's breath fogged in even loops that taught the air to relax. The storm exhausted itself and left a hush that felt earned. Ujarak blinked and let the drugs sand the sharpest teeth of pain. Soria's gloved hand hovered and withdrew, refusing ownership. The sedative made a doorway that hands could step through without stealing. Dr. Soria Khan unfolded a blue tarp and said, "We clean, we do not claim." Kalekaputi steadied the scarred shoulder with pressure born of trust. Leo Anders narrated for the record, but kept the lens wider than his urge. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, twitched a paw like a dream swimmer. Soria lifted matted fur and found the fight's rake crossing an older swollen track. She said, "The abscess runs from the tag site. The battle only lit the fuse." Gauze drank corruption and steamed cold in the air before surrendering. The smell shifted from rot to salt, and the wind approved the change. Kalek murmured a guarding chant that kept the moment upright. The radio woke and demanded reasons, but reasons could wait for signatures. Soria packed antibiotic salve and closed with patience rather than stitches. She said, "Charge me later. Let him keep his blood today," and the flow agreed. The wind eased as if tired of scolding, and the flow found a slower breath. Dr. Soria Khan said, "We drain what we can and give nothing to shock," and steadied her hands. Kalekaputi said, "Small cuts, patient hands," and leaned weight where the muscle twitched. Leo Anders filmed wide, saying, "Dignity first," and kept the wound out of the center. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, rumbled once, and let the sedative dull the fang of pain. Warm soup met gauze and steamed, and the scent tilted from rot to salt like tide turning. Soria wicked the last corruption and said, "No stitches, only salve and air." The radio crackled with a clipped voice, asking who had authorized the dart. Soria said, "Charge me later. Today we keep him breathing," and set the scalpel aside. Kalak hummed a guarding chant, and the snow listened and softened its scrape. Leo described the steps for the record, and his voice steadied as the bear's breath deepened. Ujarak's eyelids drooped, and his paw twitched like a swimmer testing water in sleep. Soria sealed the kit and said, "We are finished enough. Let the cold close the rest." The flow groaned once, a bass note of approval, and then held still. The radio became a courthouse, and policy read out its careful punishments. Dr. Soria Khan said, "I accept the reprimand, but not the death that waiting writes." Kalakaputi said, "We will sign with our own names, not with borrowed fear." Leo Anders lifted the camera and let it see the whole scene without triumph. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, opened one amber slit and watched her mouth move. That look refused gratitude and made the moment cleaner than applause. Soria dabbed antibiotic and pressed the fur smooth with a gloved palm. She said, "Old man, keep your heat and your will. The rest is ours to risk." The wind veered and brought iodine's clean edge, and the sky brightened a shade. Kalak tested the plate with his heel and nodded at the quiet song underfoot. Leo packed the tarp and said, "This is where the film stops being witness and becomes debt." The radio demanded coordinates and intent, and Soria answered with both. Her breath smoked, and each vow she spoke hung like a banner before it shredded. The flow creaked and then settled, and the day accepted their choices without comment. Silence laid itself over the flow like a blanket beaten thin by use, and then it tore. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, rolled upright and planted his paws wide. Snow burst from his coat in a halo, and the halo fell like shaken feathers. Dr. Soria Khan said, "Do not crowd him," and her voice became smaller than her eyes. Kalakaputi said, "Let him choose the next verb," and eased a half-step back. Leo Anders lowered the camera to his chest and simply watched a body remember itself. The bear shook again, and water beads jeweled the guard hairs before they froze to stars. Breath poured from his muzzle and braided with the light like cloth twisting. Soria whispered, "Engine back online," and the wind carried the joke away. Kalak smiled with the corners, the way men smile at weather turning kind. Ujarak tested weight on the blue slab and found it true, then angled to their corridor. Leo whispered, "He is writing his route again," and the ridge answered with a quiet pop. The sky opened a seam of sun that cut a bright blade across the snow. Every face lifted into that blade as if warming could be done by faith alone. Dr. Soria Khan said, "We witness, we do not herd," and let her hands hang easy. Kalakaputi paced the corridor and listened for any hollow syllable that lied. Leo Anders drifted parallel at distance, footprints matching the bear's slower meter. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, stepped from plate to plate with plain intent. His shadow lengthened and reached him, an old friend keeping time at his side. The storm retreated in tattered banners, and the light learned to be honest again. Soria said, "2 more rests and he owns the slab," and counted breaths to keep from pushing. Kalak said, "Let the ice keep its promise today," and his boots spoke fluent care. Leo framed the corridor marks and let the horizon sit low, leaving sky for hope. Ujarak paused, drank from a rim of black water, and closed his eyes at the taste. Snow hissed like soda on hot iron, where his breath met crystals in the air. Soria swallowed relief and would not let it grow into pride. She knew that shape. The ridge muttered a far complaint, and then fell into a listening quiet. The group moved when he moved, and stilled when he stilled, and the lesson held. The lead narrowed to a lane of ink, and the far plate looked close as a held hand. Ujarak, a 14-year-old male polar bear, lowered into the water with calm gravity. His bulk slid under, and the edges did not crumble, as if even ice wanted him across. Dr. Surya Khan said, "We do not chase," and kept her boots planted in their shadow. Kalakapudi said, "Let the sea remember his weight kindly," and watched for a surfacing. Leo Anders whispered, "He swims," and the word felt like a lantern lit inside ribs. The bear surfaced yards away, hauled to a new plate, and stood with a steadier sway. He looked back once, the way trails look back through bodies that walked them. That look held no thanks and no plea, only presence, and it was perfect. Surya said, "Go with your own name," and lowered her eyes so the moment could pass. The wind forgot its anger for a breath, and set down the snow like a glass. Kalik bowed his head, and offered a line to the air that would not bind. Leo let the camera hang and chose memory over proof, for one clean beat. The flow closed the water with a soft clink, somewhere far down the corridor. A week later, fresh tracks appeared, and Surya said, "He passed through here, look at the stride." Kalik grinned, "Hurt things find new routes quickest." Leo filmed the prints that deepened and then lightened, a tale of strength returning. The gulls screamed overhead, dropping a fish spine as the radio's message cracked through. "Inquiry pending, report immediately." "They'll turn this into a lesson about rules," Surya muttered, and Kalik responded, "Make it a lesson about debts paid." Leo filmed, the wind pulling his hood. Ujarak's trail led to a sastrugi field where eiders hid, and Surya felt the weight of the inquiry pressing. At the hearing, Surya said, "I darted him," and the room stiffened. The chief officer asked, "If others do as you did?" She replied, "Then we stop pretending data shields us from suffering." The oldest fisher said, "The bear is alive," and the room fell silent, her words the end. The penalty was a reprimand, and a freeze on fieldwork. Surya took it like weather. "If it buys him a winter, I'll read papers," she said. Kalik clapped her shoulder. Leo murmured, "We'll finish the film anyway." Outside, Aurora lit the sky, and the sea cracked like bones beneath another tide. "He won't remember us the way we remember him," Leo said, looking up at the aurora. Kalik replied, "Bears remember by roots, not faces." Surya stood quiet. The scent of fish from down the coast lingered. "Then let the outcome be this," she said, "he learns that wounds close, and ice holds." The rumor spread. Hunters had seen a scarred male near the flow. Surya said, "Survival is practice, not luck," and Kalik strapped on snowshoes. Leo checked his gear. They followed a braided lead to find him. Ujarak, thinner, more determined, moving like he had always owned this ice. "Don't call to him," Surya said, and Kalik responded, "He hears without ears now." Leo filmed in silence. Ujarak paused to move a pile of ice with a nonchalant force. Surya smiled, a small but relieved expression. A seal popped its head, and every muscle in the bear coiled. Ujarak moved like an old master, appearing and disappearing. When the seal surfaced again, the bear's paw fell with precision. Surya said, "He needed this win." Kalik replied, "He needed the ice to keep its promise." Leo filmed, but didn't focus on the end. The bears afterward told the true story. Afterward, Ujarak cleaned his muzzle and walked away, his movements less painful. Surya said, "I can live with the reprimand." Kalik walked beside her, replying, "I can live with a bear walking." Leo grinned. The wind softened, and the distant ridge was where they had once drawn a map in snow, now simply a place. As the aurora returned, Ujarak swam through black water, climbing a low pan. The team stood silent, watching. Leo broke the silence. "We should leave him to the night." Surya answered, "We leave him to himself." Kalik added, "May your wounds teach you roots, not fears." The bear turned and walked into the dark, returning to a room he had always owned.